Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift into a story that has a little bit of everything. Money that can't buy happiness, a mansion with way too many rooms for one couple to fill, and of course, the kind of casual betrayal that only happens when you mix ego with unchecked power. So, if you haven't already, dim the lights, get that blanket just right, and let's wander into this world of soft carpets, cold champagne, and some very warm lies. Now, our tale begins, unsurprisingly, with a man who has way too much money and far too little emotional bandwidth. Let's call him Leonard Hartwell. He's one of those billionaires who likes to pretend he's down to earth. You know the type. Buys a yacht the size of a shopping mall and then posts on social media about how money isn't everything, while holding a gold-plated smoothie. His empire was built on tech investments, mergers, and probably a few business decisions best described as morally optional. But that's not why we're here. Tonight, Leonard is just the rich background furniture. Our main focus will fall on his wife, Miranda, and a man who had the misfortune of being her husband's driver, Samuel. Miranda Hartwell. Now, here's a character. Born into upper-middle-class comfort, she married upward with the kind of precision that would make a chess player blush. Elegant on the outside, perpetually bored on the inside, Miranda was the type who could redecorate entire wings of the house because she was tired of the energy. Imagine a woman who could spend 3 hours picking out a scent for her imported candles, and you're halfway there. Samuel, on the other hand, was the driver, a man in his mid-30s with the quiet posture of someone used to being both invisible and indispensable. He wasn't glamorous, he wasn't connected, he was just very, very good at getting people from point A to point B without incident. The kind of employee who remembered your coffee order, your dog's birthday, and which paparazzi to avoid on the way to dinner. For a while, life in the Hartwell household ran on that slick, empty routine that wealth often builds. Leonard was busy collecting companies, Miranda was busy collecting curated experiences, and Samuel was busy collecting parking tickets in the name of efficiency. But of course, stories like this don't exist because things stay comfortable. They exist because something shifts, sometimes just slightly, and reveals how fragile all that polished marble really is. It started one summer evening. Leonard was, as usual, away. Something about a board meeting in Zurich or maybe Singapore. Honestly, his travel schedule sounded like a geography quiz. Miranda, left to her own devices, attended a gallery opening, the kind with sculptures made of recycled shoes and cocktails that cost more than the shoes. Samuel drove her there, waited in the sleek black car, and then drove her back. The evening should have ended there, in the quiet, climate-controlled comfort of the Hartwell estate. But that night, Miranda came home simmering with a strange cocktail of resentment and wine. Her texts to Leonard had gone unanswered. Her friends were all busy being adored somewhere else. And Samuel, poor Samuel, had made the unforgivable mistake of suggesting she might want to fasten her seatbelt during the ride. "Do you always have to talk to me like that?" she had said, a sharpness in her voice that didn't match the softness of the leather seats. "Like what, ma'am?" he replied, keeping his eyes on the road. "Like I'm fragile." There was a pause, the kind that fills a car like fog. He said, "I only want you to be safe, Mrs. Hartwell." And that was that. Or at least that should have been that. But in Miranda's world, a simple, boring, perfectly normal exchange was just begging to be inflated into something dramatic. After all, what was the point of having all this wealth, if not to feel like the center of gravity? The next morning, Miranda floated into her husband's study. Silk robe, carefully unbothered expression. "Leonard, I need to tell you something," she began, and proceeded to spin a story that had about as much foundation as a celebrity wellness supplement. She claimed that Samuel had crossed boundaries, that he made her uncomfortable. She didn't give details because, of course, the less specific the lie, the harder it is to disprove. Leonard, being a man of both wealth and public relations paranoia, reacted exactly as expected. He didn't ask Samuel for his side. He didn't check the cameras in the car.
He simply decided that the best way to keep his empire spotless was to remove the potential stain. "Samuel," he said that afternoon, voice cold and clipped, "we no longer require your services. You'll receive compensation for the month." Samuel stood in the doorway, still wearing the uniform that once meant stability. "Sir, may I ask why?" Leonard didn't meet his eyes. "You know why." His gaze flicked to Miranda, standing just behind her husband, with arms folded like a bored queen. Her expression was unreadable. He didn't beg, he didn't argue. He simply said, "I hope you both remember this day," and left. Now, let's float a bit forward, 5 years to be exact, because that's how long this particular seed of falsehood had to sit underground before it sprouted something much thornier. During those 5 years, Samuel lived in the quiet margins of the city. A man with an accusation against him, especially one whispered in the halls of wealth, doesn't exactly get glowing references. He worked odd jobs, delivery runs, even spent a brief period chauffeuring a minor celebrity's Pomeranian to spa appointments. His savings drained, his name became a liability, and yet, he didn't disappear. Meanwhile, the Hartwell marriage did what most high society marriages do when built on ego and Instagram filters. It frayed. Leonard's empire was stable enough, but his attention was elsewhere. Miranda found herself surrounded by people who liked her jewelry more than her company. The mansion, with its endless corridors and imported chandeliers, began to feel like a stage set for a play no one was watching. And then came the gala. Because, of course, there was a gala. There's always a gala in these stories. A charity event to support emerging artists or save the endangered minimalist furniture movement. The cause hardly mattered. What mattered was that it brought everyone with a functioning PR team under one roof. And, through a curious twist of logistics, Samuel found himself hired as part of the external event team. Not a driver this time, too risky for his record, but a coordinator. A man with a clipboard, a headset, and a calm manner that people tended to trust. He walked those familiar halls with the quiet step of someone visiting the ghost of his former life. The mansion smelled the same, fresh lilies in the entrance, too much citrus in the east wing. And there, sweeping down the staircase, and a gown that cost more than his old car, was Miranda. She didn't recognize him at first. Why would she? The rich rarely remember those they discard. But he remembered her, and this time, he wasn't the invisible man behind the wheel. Now, before your imagination revs up, no, he didn't storm in with dramatic music and legal documents. This isn't that kind of story. Samuel wasn't there to explode. He was there to seep back into their world slowly, like a draft under a locked door. A quiet presence. A reminder. The gala came and went, but Samuel stayed in the city. He began to appear at the periphery of the Hartwell circle, consulting for events, advising suppliers, always just close enough for Miranda to notice his name eventually. And when she did, that little seed of anxiety sprouted. Because the thing about false accusations is that they're only powerful as long as everyone agrees to forget the details. Once someone starts asking questions, quietly, politely, persistently, that power starts to slip. But we're not quite there yet. That's for a slower evening. Tonight, let's pause here, with Samuel back in the orbit of the woman who once ruined his name, and a man named Leonard still blissfully unaware that his habit of making snap decisions for the sake of appearances might be circling back with the subtle, boring vengeance only time can deliver.
Welcome back. If you're still awake, congratulations. Or condolences, depending on how you see it. If you dozed off somewhere between the imported lilies and the Pomeranian spa appointments, don't worry. This is one of those stories you can drift in and out of, like a polite dinner party you didn't really want to attend but somehow ended up at. So, Samuel, the driver-turned-ghost-turned-event consultant. His reappearance at the Hartwell Gala wasn't a thunderclap. It was more like that faint tapping sound you hear in your house at night and tell yourself is probably the pipes. He kept his head down, his clipboard up, and let the room remember him, or not, at its own pace.
For the first few weeks after the gala, nothing happened. Miranda didn't send panicked texts. Leonard didn't suddenly grow a conscience. The world of the wealthy, after all, moves slowly, not because they lack urgency, but because their mistakes take time to ripen. Samuel worked another event, then another. People liked his calm efficiency. One day, he was coordinating guest arrivals at a museum benefit. Another week, he was advising a high-end security firm on how to manage VIP transport logistics. He was rebuilding, brick by brick, but not loudly. Loudness is for those who still think justice has to shout. Miranda, on the other hand, began to feel a draft in her otherwise airtight world. It started small. A mutual acquaintance mentioned Samuel in passing. "Oh, didn't you used to have a driver by that name?" Another guest at a luncheon casually asked, "Wasn't he let go under odd circumstances?" She laughed them off, of course. Miranda had perfected the art of the effortless shrug. But later, in the mirror-lined bathroom of her favorite spa, she found herself asking the one question people like her rarely enjoy. What if they remember? Leonard remained blissfully preoccupied. There was a merger in Tokyo, a lawsuit in California, a yacht stuck in customs somewhere off the coast of Greece. He had little time for Miranda's sudden bursts of introspection. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked once over breakfast, scrolling through 2 phones at once. "I'm fine," which in her language meant absolutely not, but please don't look too closely. And so Samuel did what he had learned was the most effective form of presence: consistent, quiet existence. Not threats, not headlines, just an undeniable fact of life. Like a recurring dream that doesn't quite wake you up, but leaves you with a trace of unease in the morning. Now, let's drift sideways for a moment, because this is how these stories tend to breathe. Wealthy circles thrive on appearances, and appearances thrive on gossip. Gossip, in turn, thrives on small, verifiable truths, and Samuel was quietly supplying those truths, not to tabloids, to people who mattered more than tabloids. Event boards, hiring committees, the vaguely aristocratic people who still believe their dinner parties shape the moral compass of the city. "What happened to him?" someone asked at a rooftop soiree, sipping a drink that looked like it had been invented by a confused botanist. "Something about misconduct," another murmured. "But, those stories, they never quite add up." Miranda heard the echoes of these conversations without ever being in the rooms. That's the thing about a long, slow revenge. It's rarely a direct attack. It's erosion. A quiet tide that pulls at the edges of your reputation while you pretend not to notice. Meanwhile, Samuel lived modestly. A small apartment with mismatched furniture, a secondhand car that didn't smell of leather, just of air freshener and perseverance. He didn't spend his evenings plotting elaborate downfall charts. He cooked, he read, sometimes he wrote down pieces of the story, not out of obsession, but as if to remind himself that it had actually happened, that 5 years of quiet humiliation hadn't been a bad dream. He also started to receive small, almost imperceptible apologies from the world. A former maid from the Hartwell estate sent him a message. "I always knew it wasn't true. I'm sorry I didn't say more back then." An old friend vouched for him in a contract negotiation. These weren't dramatic moments, just small lights in a long corridor. Miranda, however, began to dread her own reflection, not because she looked any different. Her beauty routine was still sponsored by half the French pharmaceutical industry, but because every time she saw her own face, she remembered the moment Samuel looked at her and said, "I hope you both remember this day." She was remembering now. One afternoon, while Leonard was on yet another urgent business trip, Miranda attended a planning brunch for an upcoming fundraiser. And there he was, Samuel. Not staring at her, not even acknowledging her really, just talking to the head of logistics like he belonged there. Because now, inconveniently, he did. "Is that?" one of her acquaintances whispered. "Oh yes, we used to employ him. It didn't work out." "Oh?" the woman asked, the way people ask when they already sense the answer is going to be sticky. "Just didn't work out," Miranda said again, taking a large sip of water. That night, she texted Leonard, "We need to talk about Samuel." Leonard responded with a thumbs up emoji, which is billionaire husband language for later, probably never. So what happens when a lie starts to rot from the inside out? Not a scandal, not yet, just a slow shift in the room whenever your name is mentioned. The kind of shift that makes you talk faster at dinner parties. The kind of shift that makes you check your social calendar and find that people are suddenly busy, more often than not. And Samuel? He didn't gloat. He didn't have to. The best revenge in certain circles is simply showing up, again and again, until your absence is no longer the story. Your presence is. Let's drift a little closer to the inevitable pivot, because you already know this kind of story doesn't end in a courtroom or a headline. It ends in something quieter, heavier, a truth arriving late to a very well-decorated party.
Welcome back again. Still with me? That's impressive. Or maybe you've just left this playing on loop for the dog while you went to make tea. Either way, welcome to the next soft layer of this slow-brewing social casserole. By the time autumn rolled in, the kind of autumn that cost several $1,000s in seasonal decor, the whispers about Samuel had grown legs. Not fast legs, more like those little robotic vacuum legs that quietly bump into furniture and keep going. They weren't crashing through the marble halls yet, just gliding along, persistent. Miranda noticed first in the invitations. They didn't stop coming, but they began to shift. Less front row, more we'll see if there's space at the table. The hostess who used to gush over her gluten-free amuse-bouches now sent politely delayed RSVPs. Her Pilates instructor suddenly restructured her schedule. You know the kind of social frost. Thin enough to deny, cold enough to feel. She tried to ignore it, of course. That was her preferred strategy. Wear the louder necklace, buy the more conspicuous bag, pretend everything was curated on purpose. But in her quieter moments, late at night or during those long steam facials where your own thoughts sound unusually loud, she thought of Samuel. Meanwhile, Samuel was busy being boringly successful. Not glamorous, not tabloid successful, just the steady, dependable, moderately underpaid kind of successful that makes wealthy people say, "Oh, we should hire him again." His consulting work with event boards meant his name appeared in polite circles more often, and every time it did, it came with a faint footnote. Wasn't there something odd about how he left the Hartwells? Now, about Leonard. He was still largely absent, physically, emotionally, dietarily. The man had a knack for being everywhere the problem wasn't. Tokyo, Dubai, some vaguely defined board meeting on a boat. When Miranda finally cornered him for dinner one rainy Tuesday, he listened to her concerns with all the intensity of someone reviewing a menu they'd already memorized. "Leonard, people are starting to talk." "People always talk," he said, not looking up from his phone. "This is different." "Is it, though?" She stared at him, the way one might stare at a thermostat that insists the room is warm when your fingers say otherwise. "Do you want to deal with it?" she asked. He sipped his wine. "Not really." And that was, unfortunately, the end of their strategy meeting. Let's drift sideways again, because in these kinds of slow burn stories, the sideways parts are where the heat really comes from. A small dinner party, midweek, candles, linen, someone's overpaid sommelier pouring wines that tasted like mood boards. One of the guests, not Samuel, he never attended these things unless paid, mentioned casually, "I heard their old driver's doing quite well now, runs half the logistics for the city's charity circuit." "Oh, that's nice," someone replied. "Yes, nice." Miranda, seated 2 chairs down, felt the conversation tilt toward her like a lazy ceiling fan. No one said her name. They didn't need to. In that world, silence often does the heavy lifting. Now, to be clear, Samuel wasn't engineering this. Not exactly. He wasn't planting stories, buying columns, or slipping dossiers under doors. He was just existing. And sometimes existing with quiet dignity is the loudest accusation you can make. He'd pass Miranda occasionally at a fundraiser, a museum opening, a committee brunch. Their eyes would meet briefly, like 2 people both pretending they didn't leave the same elevator.
She'd smile the smile of someone rehearsing indifference. He'd nod the nod of someone who had outgrown the performance entirely. And every time, the gap widened. Not in scandalous leaps, no headlines, no lawsuits, just a slow societal osmosis, where people stopped assuming Miranda's version of the story was the whole one. They didn't accuse her. They simply began to wonder. It was around this time she tried to reclaim the narrative in the very Miranda way, by redecorating. The foyer got a new chandelier, the living room lost 3 tasteful portraits and gained an abstract piece that looked like a minor car crash. She told herself it was all about new energy, but everyone knows new chandeliers are just louder ways to say, please stop looking over there. Leonard didn't notice the changes, or if he did, he assumed they cost what they needed to cost and therefore didn't require his opinion. He had bigger problems, or at least more expensive ones. Samuel, in contrast, found his evenings increasingly filled with silence. Not a lonely silence, a calm one. He'd come home from a job, make himself tea, read something that wasn't about them. His revenge, if you could even call it that yet, wasn't a bonfire. It was a long, slow frost, and the more it settled, the less he seemed to need to goo. But the city noticed. Wealthy cities always do, eventually. A rumor repeated long enough becomes etiquette, and soon the same people who once patted Miranda's hand and whispered, "Poor dear," began saying things like, "Well, you know, it's all rather complicated." And if you've ever been in a social world built on delicate reputations, you know that complicated is the first nail in the crate. So, as autumn slipped into winter and the gala season began to stretch itself out like a sleepy cat, Samuel received an invitation, not from the Hartwells, of course, but from one of their rivals, one of those quietly competitive families who see social slip-ups as opportunities to adjust the scoreboard. He accepted. Why not? Miranda heard about it 3 days later, not from Leonard, from someone entirely, and for the first time in years, she didn't know which part of her smile to wear.
Hey again, still here? Or maybe you're listening with one eye open, phone slipping closer to your pillow. Good. Tonight's little stroll is best consumed when you're somewhere between I should sleep and I wonder what rich people worry about at 2 a.m. Spoiler, mostly they worry about being left out. By the time winter stretched over the city, the kind of winter that exists more in the florist's invoices than the streets, Miranda's calendar started looking sparse. Not empty, never empty. These people don't do empty, they do curated pauses. But the curated pauses were starting to line up like dominoes. That ski lodge invitation in Aspen, suddenly rescheduled. The art benefit she'd attended for 8 consecutive years, venue capacity was reevaluated. Translation, they found better people to photograph in the foyer. Miranda took it personally, of course, not loudly, not in the shouty, scandalous way, just with that quiet tightening of the jaw as she scrolled through social posts of parties she used to be at. She'd show Leonard the phone over breakfast. Look, they didn't invite us. He'd murmur, adjusting his cufflinks. Leonard. Yes? This is the 5th one. He looked at the screen like a man being asked to care about an unfamiliar cat. Maybe they're trimming lists. They're trimming us, she said. He shrugged, poured more coffee. We could host something. Of course they could. Hosting was the Billionaire's version of a white flag, a way of saying, if you won't invite me, I'll make you attend me. So she planned a gathering, a midwinter soiree. Imported pine arrangements, a violinist whose name had too many accents to pronounce comfortably, menus printed on paper that probably had opinions about its own carbon footprint. The turnout? Acceptable. Polite, but not radiant. Guests came, stayed a courteous 90 minutes, and left with the kind of smiles that say, we came, we posted a story, we're leaving now. The air never quite warmed, no matter how high the thermostat went. Meanwhile, Samuel was attending other events, quietly. He wasn't flaunting. That wasn't his style. He was consulting for a rival family's new cultural foundation. Not their chauffeur, not their servant, their advisor. The word alone gave certain circles a chill. the way a draft sneaks in when you thought you shut the window. People noticed. Not with headlines, but with whispers over lamb tartare. He seems to be doing well. Yes, I hear he's very discreet. Wasn't he with the Hartwells once? Briefly. And just like that, the narrative had shifted from what he supposedly did to what they supposedly hid. In this world, that's how exile starts. One polite canapé at a time. Miranda, ever the decorator of crises, tried to spin it. She leaned into holiday philanthropy, blankets for the less fortunate, staged photos at the orphanage she hadn't visited in years, an op-ed about giving back. It read like an apology that didn't know what it was apologizing for. Leonard? He was still orbiting at executive altitude. He cared, but in the way a man cares about stock market dips in regions he doesn't plan to visit. It'll even out, he told me once, half watching a news ticker. These things do. It didn't. Because this wasn't a thing that evens out. This was a slow rearrangement. Old friends drifted just enough to create polite distance. Invitations stopped including plus ones. Her name slipped from seating charts to waiting lists. And the only constant in that gentle vanishing act was Samuel. Present, composed, and pointedly uninterested in her. She saw him at a winter gala, one she didn't host, and he didn't approach her. That, somehow, was worse. Because nothing undercuts a well-rehearsed grudge, just like the other party not even playing. She caught his reflection in a mirrored column. The same man, older now, quieter in posture but not diminished, he was speaking with two trustees, both of whom she'd known for years. They were laughing. Real laughter, the kind that doesn't pause for photographers. Miranda looked away, adjusted her bracelet, smiled at no one. And if you've ever stood in a glittering room full of people you once controlled like chess pieces, only to feel the board quietly shift under you, you know that is its own kind of winter.
Hey there again. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You're either deeply invested in the gentle chaos of wealthy people, or you've fallen asleep twice and this just autoplayed. Either way, welcome back. So, winter was over, technically. The snow had melted into that thin, expensive mist cities wear when the seasons change, but for Miranda, the chill never quite left. It clung, not like a scandal headline, but like that faint smell of dry cleaning no one comments on. It started with a whisper. It always does. A former house manager, the kind of man you forget until he suddenly remembers you, was overheard saying he always thought the story didn't add up. Not loudly, over a wine tasting, which, in that world, is about the same as shouting in a market square. Then another former staffer casually mentioned a timeline discrepancy at a gallery opening, and because this was a world built on memory and menu cards, it didn't take long before people started comparing notes. Strange, said one socialite, balancing a glass of something expensive and slightly citrusy. Yes, quite, murmured another, adjusting her silk scarf as if to hide the gossip spilling up beneath it. I always wondered if... And that ellipsis, that was the real beginning of Samuel's rehabilitation. He didn't push, he didn't campaign, he just existed, in the right places, at the right times, being the one thing moneyed society finds irresistible, understatedly wronged. Miranda, sensing this shift like a cat notices a missing chair, launched what could generously be called a charm offensive. Morning talk shows, columns about resilience, a photo shoot for a charity that specialized in something pleasantly vague like urban enrichment. She wore pale colors, always a sign someone is trying to look transparent. The response? Tepid. Respectful, yes, but you could feel the press release drafts being recycled. Thank you, Mrs. Hartwell, they said with smiles as thin as their hors d'oeuvres. Leonard, meanwhile, was starting to see the pattern, and not the good kind, not the kind you frame in a boardroom. He noticed the sponsors hesitating. The phone calls delayed. The foundation that once used his surname like a guarantee now sent emails that began with regrets to inform. At dinner one night, he folded his napkin and asked casually, "Do you want to tell me the whole story now?"
Miranda didn't flinch. Or maybe she did, but she called it a spasm from the cold appetizer. She said, "There is no story." "There's always a story," he replied, "and people are starting to tell theirs." She hated that vague plural, theirs, because it meant it was no longer her version against his, it was her version against the room. Samuel, for his part, had taken on a mentorship role with a new driver working for a different family. You could almost imagine him leaning against a polished car, offering advice like, keep your head down, keep the receipts, and never believe the word indispensable. It just means they haven't found your replacement yet. It was a quiet sort of revenge, the kind that didn't make headlines, but made atmosphere shift. And slowly, the city started treating him like a comeback story. Not a dramatic one, just the sort that got a nod at galas and a respectful handshake at the opera house. Someone whispered he'd been offered a consulting role in a new transport network because he understands discretion. Imagine that, discretion as a career. Miranda tried to brush it off. "These people love a redemption arc," she told a friend at brunch, poking at an avocado toast as though it were responsible for the weather. "Yes," the friend said, "but they also love a villain who never quite apologizes." She didn't ask which one she was meant to be.